Hey guys, today we're out in the forest with the Rivian R1S. This is the second vehicle from Rivian, and it's their first three-row all-electric SUV.
But today we're not going to talk about this vehicle in particular. We're going to be talking about Rivian as a whole, where they've been, where they're at, and where they're going from here.
Yep, and then of course we're going to do that taking this out on a drive on the usual roads that we drive on, so stay tuned for the full review of the Rivian R1S, plus some additional content later. Well, I guess the first thing we should talk about, Travis, is where did Rivian come from?
Yeah, so Rivian started in 2009, and it was originally going by a different name. They ended up going with Rivian as a combination of Indian River. I
did not know that.
I think it ended up in a better place than it started, but it was 2011 they put out the first prototype, which was a sporty coupe, which I think it was a good direction to not stick with that.
Yes.
And from there, you know, the first thing I ended up putting out is the delivery vehicle.
Yeah, it's true. A lot of people don't really think about that. The Rivian R1T was technically not first. It was actually the Amazon truck.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that's kind of the history of Rivian and where it all came from is not only did they say we're going to build an electric vehicle, which as we've seen a lot of electric manufacturers do, all these new car manufacturers, they said we're also going to build a commercial fleet delivery vehicle, and I think that's led to a lot of their success, at least getting started.
Yeah, they definitely helped the startup cost side because they were able to get in investors that were not only interested in giving them money, but also in buying the product, like Amazon. Amazon's not just the, I own part of this thing. It's like, I own part of this thing, but also I need some electric trucks.
Right, and the big thing from Amazon, at one point they were up to 18% of the ownership stake in Rivian. And on top of saying, hey, we're going to commit funds, they also said, we're going to commit to purchasing 100,000 units of that delivery vehicle. And that's a significant number for a company that hasn't built anything yet. That's orders on the table, and that's production intent. So
yeah, and kind of an early investor that didn't end up sticking with it was Ford. And initially there was supposed to be a Ford or a Lincoln and or both built on the same platform as this R1S and the R1T. And that, oddly enough, never happened. How do you feel about that? I think that was a mistake for Ford not to.
It feels like a misstep on my end. If they invested early into a startup company, you know, the thought is that they're going to get something out of the deal, and that something was going to be this product, this IP, this technology that they didn't have in-house, and someone else is going to work for on their behalf. Obviously, we've seen it come out in the Rivian products, and it's been good. It's been good quality stuff. It's worked. It's been tested, and so I know Ford has their own vehicles up and running, but I was just surprised.
Hey, we've just discovered what happens when you're in all-terrain mode and you don't move out of all-terrain mode and you get onto paved road. When they're, say, 20 miles an hour max, they're not kidding. That is it. That is all we get.
We've hit a software limit.
Yeah, we hit a software limit there. But if we go to all-purpose here, let's see how long it's going to take us to actually get into all-purpose mode here. I think the suspension has to lower. Sideways note, Rivian is an all-adventure brand. Oh, there we go. Now that the suspension is lowered, we're off. Rivian is an all-adventure brand, and so right now, everything in their lineup is luxury truck, basically.
Right, and it's a significant focus for them. You know, the truck, the SUV, they are all rugged, they are all capable, and I think they're looking to carry that into the future. There are only a few brands that really commit to it in that way. I think we talked about Jeep and Land Rover being the rugged, heavy-duty, SUV truck adventure vehicles, but so far it's worked.
Yeah, it is kind of funny, like that description. It's now there are three basically. There's Rivian, there's Jaguar Land Rover, the Land Rover side of that, and then there's Jeep. I guess you could put Ineos Grenadier in that whenever they come to the United States, but I always laugh at this when you go to a Jeep presentation and they say, we're going to be the greenest full-line SUV brand in America. And I'm like, well, hang on a minute. How many competitors do you have? I'm like, well, there's Land Rover. I'm like, so out of the two, you're going to be greener than the other one, is what you're saying.
Someone has to be, right?
Right. And then they forget about Rivian, I guess, which is here.
Well, and Rivian's got some catch up to do, right? When they talk about full line SUV, Rivian has two models.
Right.
They do not cover the expanse thus far, but it's a noble goal for Jeep, and I think it's one of those things where competition just breeds better results for the consumer, really.
Yeah, and we're talking about the sort of what is Rivian. Like the target customer of Rivian is kind of interesting because it is very much that Land Rover, I would say, customer, or maybe Jeep Grand Cherokee and upwards. It's certainly not the Jeep Compass customer. This is, this particular vehicle is almost $100,000.
Right.
They start at 79. You can get way up there near the triple digits. On the used market, they can still command over $100,000 for a used one.
There are people still trying to flip their initial orders in for a profit. So,
but it is interesting because this is not just one of the most capable electric vehicles created. I mean, the ride height of this vehicle is a defining factor of the Rivian driving nature out on the road. And I think you noticed at first the sort of top heavy, not exactly top heavy because center of gravity is still really low, but that sort of different feel. It definitely feels very different than a Model X or whatever. But driving down the road, this in standard height mode has nearly double the ground clearance of a Model Y.
Yeah, I mean, it's a significant piece of the puzzle that Rivian is trying to achieve, off-road capability, and some of that's going to come from height. So with that height comes the different driving dynamics, and absolutely, I felt it right away. It's not a light vehicle by any means. It's not the heaviest, but because it's so high up, the suspension is working to try and keep everything balanced, and I think they've done a pretty good job. But it's a different dynamic for sure.
It is a little heavier than a Model, just in relation. Like this one is a little heavier than a Model X, but the battery is 30% larger than a Model X. And that's needed, of course, because that third row in the way back is an actual usable third row, which is the thing that I think I found most surprising.
Yeah, there's room. And like you mentioned, in something like the Model X, it's very tight, it's very compact. The other thing is that this vehicle comes with very different tires than you get on your standard Model X. The aerodynamics are very different. While they've done a good job of making the most of what they have to work with, this is not nearly as efficient of a vehicle as something like a Tesla Model X.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So you have to have that bigger battery to make the difference up in total driving range.
Yeah, and when you put this in its off-road mode in the high suspension, not the highest, just high, it is nearly 3 times the ground clearance that you'll find in the Ford Mustang Mach-E, which is just mind-blowingly tall. So if you're out there on a trail and you want to take an electric vehicle and you want to drive over a log, you could, because this actually has the clearance. Whether or not you have the tires to actually climb up over that log, that's a different thing. But this is also one of the few electric vehicles where you can get all-terrain tires on it right from the factory.
Yeah, and you can always add more grip, different traction for your different needs. But the other thing that I noticed when I was out here driving, and the standard tires are more all-terrain than like I mentioned, you get in a traditional road tire. But this cabin is so well insulated that I never found myself listening to tires on a regular basis, and I was pretty impressed by that.
But of course, this particular model is kind of a weird one in a way, because the reality is people aspire to being adventurous and the adventure vehicles, etc. But the average Jeep owner and the average Land Rover owner and the average Rivian owner is probably not really going to go off-roading on a regular basis. So this has 22-inch wheels on it with not a lot of cushion. So you definitely feel more of the road imperfections in this model than we did in the R1T that we had for a while because of that. And we deliberately went with the cushier tire on it.
Yeah.
But I think the air suspension does a pretty good job.
With most electric vehicles, I prefer the smaller wheel just because the suspensions are carrying a lot more weight, and so that extra tire really does improve the ride quality. But when I think of Rivian, and like we talked about the ideal customer, I almost wonder if the term lifestyle comes into play. While the vehicle has capability, what's it going to be used for on a regular basis? And so I think of lifestyle vehicles that are not necessarily going to push the vehicle to their max, but people like to feel outdoorsy.
Exactly.
They like to feel like they can go camping even if they're just running to school and off to work. But it's there. It has the option.
Yeah, and in conserve mode, it's pretty efficient, and you have that big third row in the back. But that takes me to my next question. So, we've had this argument, you and I. Is Tesla luxury? Is Rivian luxury? Are they a luxury brand, in your opinion? I would say yes.
I have to say yes. Obviously, the price tag is one of the first things you look at, and what's it competing against? Well, it's really only competing against luxury vehicles, especially for the size. This is a large vehicle, but not an enormous vehicle. So if you look at I guess, price per square inch of the vehicle, it's going to be up there.
Right.
It's got a lot of luxury features. It looks to provide a luxury experience. Like I said, the insulation on the cabin, you don't get those on a lower price vehicle, not in the same way.
Shoppers, I could see shoppers that are interested in something like a Lincoln Aviator or a BMW X7 shopping for something like this instead, because it has that same sort of sized interior, roughly, and very similar exterior dimensions to those as well.
But like we mentioned, a different edge, right? They're going for a different look. And I think back to how does Rivian get to here today? How is Rivian in such a good financial position and continue to put out units as an up-and-coming manufacturer, which is incredibly difficult and prior to Tesla near impossible. I think Tesla really has led the way in Rivian being able to get started and get going, because investors have seen success, and Rivian was able to capitalize on that. So this is in a way built because Tesla made it, but going a very different direction with the whole thing.
I think arguably that's right. You know, Tesla proved that it was a viable business model. Rivian got way more investment cash as a result. So when we take a look at the amount of cash that Rivian has on hand now versus what Tesla had at the same stage in development, same stage in shipping, Rivian's got a lot more cash on hand. So they're a much more stable, viable company than Tesla was at that same point in their development. And I think a lot of that is because Tesla did work. And that's kind of an interesting twist here. So it's like, how is Rivian a luxury company and Tesla is not?
I think some of it is the feature set that you find inside. These cabins, I would say, are much more sculpted. Simple things like the seats are much more intricate. Stitching and
but they're not more comfortable.
Layout. No, I don't think they are. I do think it's a comfortable seat. I feel like it's a supportive seat, but it's not cushy.
Right.
And
I will say that Rivian is still missing some, what I would say are quote unquote luxury features that you would find in a traditional luxury brand. Not saying that Rivian isn't, because again, I believe Rivian is a luxury brand, but a traditional luxury brand at this price point would have massaging seats, probably ventilated seats in the back. We would have an opening sunroof. We would have more comfortable seats, more adjustable seats, heads-up display,
heated and cooled cup holders, and those sorts of
kinds of things. And we find some of those features, traditional features in here, like the ventilated seats, which I do appreciate. But we also don't have a heat pump. We don't have any sort of ergo motion seat, any anti-fatigue technology going on there.
Right.
We do have adaptive cruise control, but we don't have any hands-free driving like you find in a Ford or a Lincoln or a Cadillac, mind you. So it is interesting, that this is definitely competing with those luxury entries on price, but not necessarily feature set. The trade-off, of course, is that it can go 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, which is a luxury feature, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And it's electric in its brand.
I think when you look at the other models available, the R1S, which I suspect is going to outsell the R1T by a substantial amount, because the SUV market is so much larger. But when you look at the R1T, what is its competition? Because you have something like now on available for purchase is the Ford Lightning, the Chevy Silverado, and the GMC the
Sierra. They're
Sierra.
a little late.
Those are going to be, I think, more luxury. Obviously, their price tags start quite a bit higher than you get in something like a Ford Lightning, but there aren't really luxury trucks. And so if the kind of luxury experience that the Rivian R1T provides matches what you're looking for, I just don't think there's anything else in the market. So that's another thing I think they did well with being an electric-only manufacturer. They did not try and become a Tesla killer. They went a very different direction for a very different audience. And again, so far it's worked.
And that's why I'm kind of surprised that Ford bailed in a way, because Ford could have created a Lincoln truck. They could have resurrected the Blackwood name and stuck it on an electric Rivian truck. And that could have been kind of cool, but they chose not to. They wanted to go in a different direction, and they actually sold off all their shares. But it could have been a different world.
And for some reason or another, the motors and the technology going into this vehicle isn't what they wanted for the Lightning or the Mach-E, I suppose. So
now that I can understand. So, and we'll talk about this, I guess, more in the Rivian R1S full video, but we should touch on it now. Is that Rivian started off buying motors from a third-party company, and that's what we're driving here, is the quad motor setup.
Yeah.
But then they spent a lot of time and attention and money developing their own in-house dual motor setup that is a little bit less powerful, but surprisingly not that much less. It's only half a second 0 to 60 difference, but significantly more efficient. So if you're looking for something less expensive, more efficient, and you're willing to give up a little bit of theoretical off-road capability, then there's that dual motor option for you.
I think long term that's going to do well for them. You know, I think every model, let's look at the F-150 just as an example. There's a lot of different kinds of F-150s out there, but the Halo F-150 is the Raptor, and it's always going to exist. And you can slap superchargers on your F-150 from Roush and Shelby and all those other options, but if it's not a Raptor, it's not a Raptor. And so when you look at Rivian, and if it's not a quad motor, then it's not a quad motor, but you can get a lot of the similar performance and benefits from that dual motor setup. So I think it's a great thing to stagger that lineup, and I think the quad motor will have a place at the top, but it's good to diversify. And for some people, 4 motors might just seem like a little bit too much for them, and they just don't know what to do with it.
4 motors can be a bit much. I mean, it does have some advantages in torque factoring. So as we're going around corners like this and you punch it a bit, the quad motors are going to try and figure out what to do. Off-roading, you can have more power dedicated to one wheel without a locker, which is something the dual motor setup does not have. So the dual motor setups, they just have open diffs, and they have to use the brake-based traction control to move power around. So that is kind of a bummer, and definitely a product differentiator. But you know, I think that the dual motor is more rational, and that's obviously going to be their higher volume motor over time. When we see the next generation of Rivian product, which we should probably talk about now, that's most likely not going to offer the quad motor.
Right. I mean, what Rivian's talked about next is expanding the lineup. So the R1 line is going to move to the R2 line, and that's expected to be the smaller, more affordable. I guess I'm thinking if this is a large Jeep competitor, we're thinking something more like a Grand Cherokee size vehicle. And I would not expect to see 4 motors in that one. It's a different customer base, it's a different use case, and so it's great that they can have the technology that will continue to grow with the lineup.
I will say one thing that I am also, I guess, similarly surprised about, that is good to know from a consumer perspective, is that Rivians are expensive, yes, absolutely. I'm not calling them cheap, but they have not accelerated their pricing as much as GM has done on some of their EVs lately. So this starts, you could buy a Rivian R1S for the price of a base Silverado EV work truck that doesn't have carpet, has a urethane steering wheel, vinyl seats. You know, that is, I think, is a good pricing position for them to be in, and kind of a bad pricing position for those GM trucks to be in. If you want the Silverado RST, which is going to be the first consumer model available, that is going to be over $100,000 easily. The one they were showing us at the launch event of the work truck, they estimated its MSRP was going to be about $120,000 as equipped, and it does offer some cool features, but oh my, that is fantastically more expensive than the Rivian lineup.
I mean, trucks have gotten more and more expensive over the years, and you can get a $100,000 Silverado, but it's a substantial increase. And I think it's a greater conversation that I think we'll definitely explore some other time about the pricing of electric vehicles and relative to their internal combustion competition. But it's tough to say. I know the Rivian and the Silverado, for example, they're going to be different vehicles. But if you're looking at similar things like battery packs, motor performance, and capability on most everyday situations, how do you pay $40,000 more for a relatively similar product? And I think consumers are going to be the ones who help sort that out, because we'll see which models are selling. And hopefully the manufacturers respond to that. Yeah,
it's going to be, we're entering interesting times with more and more electric options in this segment, because Jeep is coming out with their first all-electric vehicle that we should be seeing that by the end of this year, and it should be on sale early 2024. That's going to be a somewhat smallish off-road four-wheel drive SUV. And then we have the Ram pickup truck also coming online, the Ram BEV, with a huge battery, and they're proposing 500 miles of range with that, and I kind of believe it because I mean it's basically a 250 kilowatt hour battery. It's absolutely massive.
I think what I'll be curious to see on that, and like these other models, is what the final pricing is going to be, because what we've seen is that the original quoted or estimated pricing is not always what happens upon release.
Yeah, I will say that some manufacturers seem to be better about that than others. Rivian has not had a dramatic continual escalation in pricing like we've seen from GM on their vehicles. And Ford on Lightning, they did the escalation and then they de-escalated. They actually put a pretty big price cut on Lightning for 2024.
Yeah.
We know the pricing already. We don't know availability necessarily, but Ford has said they're going to build about double the number in 2024 as 2023. The pricing is going to be several $1,000s less. Not quite as inexpensive as when it launched, but I think close enough that I was surprised.
Yeah, and when we look at vehicles like the Rivian, it may be one of those things over time we do see them in a position to de-escalate some of that pricing with the newer models, hoping really that they're in a competitive position, because while I do agree this is a luxury, it's not quite an ultra luxury, and I think we're getting kind of close to the price point, what you get in the vehicle versus what you end up paying for it. So if they can do that smaller model, the R2, at a competitive pricing with the rest of the segment that they fall into, I think it'd be a great position, not just for them, but again for electric vehicles moving forward, because if a up-and-comer who does not have the financial assets of some of these larger companies is able to do it, then it bodes well long-term for these other vehicles going into production.
Indeed. So so if you want to know more about the R1S or the R1T, or of course the upcoming R2, be sure and like, subscribe, and check out all of our other related content. Where can they find us on the social media stuff, Travis?
So Auto Buyer's Guide on Facebook. Obviously, you can find us in the community pages in the comment sections on these videos on EV Buyer's Guide. Let us know what you think. We'd love to hear it, and we'll be able to respond to quite a few, because this is the growing electric vehicle segment, the manufacturers that are only building these cars. We want to know what you think about it, and we want to see how far these companies can go.
Yeah, and don't forget us on the Twitters and the X's and the posts and all of those other social media things that are popping up everywhere.
We'll have a list.
Yeah, they're all down there in the description. See everybody later.
Bye.